Long, long ago in a lush savanna where the sun reigned supreme, painting the marshlands in hues of emerald and gold, there lived a young couple deeply in love. Aduku, the husband, was a man of many talents, a farmer by day and a hunter by night. His wife, Mileti, was a vibrant and kind-hearted woman, now heavily pregnant with their first child. Their village, nestled deep in the marshlands, was a close-knit community where everyone knew each other. Aduku and Mileti were beloved by their neighbors, seen as responsible and good-hearted. They exchanged pleasantries with fellow villagers on their way to and from the farm, their laughter echoing through the savannah. But their joy was about to be tested in ways they could never have imagined. For 3 days, Mileti had been in labor. The pain was relentless, and the village women gathered in their huts, their faces etched with concern. The rain poured outside, thunder roaring and lightning splitting the sky as the experienced midwives worked tirelessly to deliver Mileti's baby. Aduku stood outside, his heart heavy with worry. He prayed to the gods for a safe delivery, his hands trembling as he clutched a small charm his father had given him years ago. Suddenly, his friend Bako appeared, clapping him on the shoulder. "Aduku! Be a man! Why do you wear such a horrified face? Everything will be fine. My wife labored for 2 weeks before bearing my son. I'm sure it's a boy. Boys are stubborn. They don't like coming out easily." Aduku managed a weak smile, but his eyes remained fixed on the huts. Bako gestured to the sky. "Look! The gods have opened their bosom. The rain is pouring down, which means there will be plenty of game tonight. Stop worrying. Go get your bow and arrow. Let's hunt. When your baby arrives, you'll need fresh meat to celebrate." Aduku hesitated, but the logic in Bako's words struck a chord. He nodded, fetched his hunting gear, and stepped out into the rain, his bow and arrow in hand. "Let's go!" Aduku shouted, his voice cutting through the storm. "We'll return with a bountiful hunt. The gods are in a good mood tonight." The two men ventured into the dense forest, the vegetation thick and dark. The rain pounded relentlessly, and the thunder seemed to shake the very earth beneath their feet. They used their machetes to clear a path, the branches of towering trees stretching like skeletal fingers above them. As they delved deeper, strange sounds began to echo through the forest, sounds that didn't belong to the storm. Aduku stopped, his senses on high alert. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. Bako nodded, his face pale. "Yes, something is trailing us. It's like we're being haunted." Aduku's grip tightened on his bow. "This is the forest of my forefathers," he declared, his voice firm despite the fear creeping into his heart. "My great-grandfather hunted here, and so did my father. The gods know I'm here. I belong here. You can't scare me." As if in response, the bushes shook violently, and the sounds grew louder, closer. Aduku and Bako exchanged a glance, their fear palpable. "We need to split up," Aduku said, his mind racing. "Let's turn the hunter into the prey. You go east and I'll meet you at the riverbed down the hill." Bako nodded and disappeared into the shadows. Aduku reached into his hunting jacket and pulled out one of the charms in his hunting jacket. He whispered an incantation, his voice trembling, and threw the charm into the air. Then he ran. The forest seemed to come alive around him. The rain, the thunder, the lightning, it all blended into a cacophony of chaos. But the sound that terrified him most was the one behind him, the relentless pursuit of something unseen. Aduku ran with all his strength, his heart pounding in his chest. The figure, whatever it was gaining on him. He could feel its presence, cold and menacing, just a step behind. The forest, once a place of solace and tradition, now felt like a killing ground for gods and evil spirits. The trees seemed to close in around him, their branches clawing at his skin. The rain stung his eyes, and the thunder roared like the laughter of a malevolent force. Aduku's mind raced. What was chasing him? Was it a spirit, a beast, or something far worse? As he sprinted through the dense undergrowth, the ground beneath him suddenly gave way. Aduku's feet slipped and he tumbled forward, his hands flailing as he tried to grab onto something, anything, to stop his fall. He plummeted into a deep gaping hole, the darkness swallowing him whole. His body slammed against the jagged walls of the pit, the impact knocking the breath out of him. Just as he thought he would plunge into the abyss below, his hand caught onto a small gnarled root sticking out from the side of the hole. Aduku dangled precariously from the tiny root, his fingers slipping inch by inch as the rain poured down, making the root sleek and unstable. Below him, the deep, endless valley yawned like the mouth of a beast, waiting to swallow him whole. His arms burned with the effort of holding on, but he refused to let go. Not yet. Suddenly, the air grew colder and the forest fell eerily silent. The spirit appeared, its form materializing from the shadows like a nightmare come to life. It was a hollow masquerade, its face a grotesque mask of twisted wood and bone, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Its body was cloaked in tattered robes that seemed to ride and shift as if alive. Every movement it made was accompanied by a low guttural hum that resonated deep within Aduku's chest. The spirit was terrifying beyond imagination, a being that could snuff out 1,000 lives with a single swing of his hand. Yet, Aduku met its gaze with a steely resolve. "I know it's over for me now," Aduku said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his heart. "But since you've chosen to take my life, you must make me a promise. You must take care of my child. You must follow them, protect them, and ensure no harm ever comes to them. When it's time to sit, you must guide her to sit. When it's time to stand, you must guide her to stand. And when it's time to walk, you must guide her steps and make sure she never falter." The spirit tilted its head, its hollow eyes boring into Aduku's soul. "You have taken my life," Aduku continued, his voice rising with conviction. "Now you are bound to me because you owe me a life you must protect with all your power. You will only be free of this curse when my child meets an opposite gender and has intercourse. This night and the gods bear witness. This is a burden you must carry." For a moment, the spirit stood motionless, its form flickering like a dying flame. Then, with a sound like 1,000 whispers, it vanished into the bushes, dissolving into a thick black smoke that dissipated into the night. The roots gave way, and Aduku fell into the abyss, his final thoughts of Mileti and their unborn child. Back at the hut, Mileti's cries of pain finally gave way to the sound of a newborn's wail. The women in the room erupted into songs of victory, their voices rising above the storm. "It's a baby girl!" one of the midwives announced, holding the child aloft. As the midwife raised the baby to the gods, a faint, almost imperceptible shadow passed over and entered the child. The baby's cries grew louder, and the women handed her to Mileti, who cradled her with tears of joy and exhaustion. Unbeknownst to them, the spirit had entered the child, binding itself to her as Aduku had demanded. Many years later, the child had grown into a young, vibrant girl named Adia. She was beautiful, with bright golden hair that shimmered like sunlight, a stark contrast to the dark hair of the other villagers. Her presence was both captivating and unsettling, and whispers followed her wherever she went. Mileti often wondered about her husband's fate that night, and why the gods had given her a child so different from everyone else. Her suspicions about Adia's true nature came to light one fateful evening. Mileti was preparing firewood for the evening meal when the axe slipped, missing the wood and striking her foot instead. The pain was excruciating, and she cried out, clutching her bleeding toes. Adia, hearing her mother's cries, rushed to her side. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to comfort Mileti. One of her tears fell onto the injured foot, and in an instant, the wound began to heal. The bleeding stopped, the flesh knit itself back together, and the toes were whole again, as if nothing had happened. Mileti stared at her foot in shock, then at Adia, her eyes wide with disbelief. What just happened?" she whispered. Adia, equally stunned, looked at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. I don't know," she said, her voice trembling. Mileti's mind raced. She grabbed a knife and made a small cut on her arm, holding it out to Adia. "Do it again," she said, her voice urgent. Adia hesitated, then let a tear fall onto the cut. The wound closed instantly, leaving no trace of injury. Mileti stepped back, her heart pounding. "Your tears, they heal," she murmured, her voice filled with awe and fear. "You're not like other children, Adia. You're something else." As Mileti and Adia stood there, the weight of the discovery hung heavy in the air. What did this mean for Adia? Was her gift a blessing or a curse? And what of the spirit that had bound itself to her? Days turned into weeks, and Mileti's mind was consumed with worry. She sat in front of her small hut, staring at the horizon as she soliloquized. "If I leave Adia in this village and they discover her powers, they will call her a witch. They will seek to kill and burn her at the stake or ostracize us from this village. I can't let that happen." After days of agonizing over the decision, Mileti finally reached out to her sister, who lived in a bustling city far away. She explained everything: Adia's golden hair, her healing tears, and the danger they faced if the villagers found out. "Please," Mileti begged, her voice trembling with desperation. "Take Adia with you. Train her in the city, where she won't be judged for being different. Save her from this life." Her sister agreed, and soon Adia left the village for the big city, leaving behind the only home she had ever known. Adia's new life was a stark contrast to the simplicity of the village. Her aunt and uncle lived in a modest home in the heart of the city. Her uncle was a struggling pastor, leading a small congregation that barely filled the rented hall on Sundays. Every Sunday morning, the family dressed in their finest clothes and headed to church. The pastor preached with fiery passion, his voice booming as he proclaimed blessings and miracles. The congregation leapt for joy, their faith renewed by his words. But behind the scenes, the church was struggling. After one particularly sparse service, the pastor called his workers and junior pastors into his office. His face was dark with frustration. "We need more people," he said, slamming his fist on the table. "If we don't bring in new members, we won't be able to pay this month's rent. We need a revival." The room fell silent as the workers exchanged uneasy glances. They made suggestions: more evangelism, better marketing, and even hosting community events. But the pastor's frustration only grew. That night, after the church had emptied and the worker had gone home, the pastor sat in his office, his head in his hands. His wife, Adia's aunt, entered quietly, closing the door behind her. "You're still upset," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Of course I'm upset," he snapped. "The church is dying. We're drowning in debt, and no one seems to care." She hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "I have an idea," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it's unconventional." The pastor looked up, his eyes narrowing. "What is it?" "Adia's tears," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of guilt and excitement. "They heal. They've been a blessing to us at home. What if we use them to perform miracles? The crowds will swarm to our church like bees." The pastor's eyes widened, and a slow smile spread across his face. "That's it," he said, his voice filled with awe. "That's the revival we've been praying for." The next day, the pastor called his workers and instructed them to print flyers promising miracles, signs, and wonders. They distributed them across the city, targeting the sick, the crippled, and the desperate. Word spread like wildfire, and soon thousands of people flocked to the crusade ground, their faces filled with hope. The pastor had prepared meticulously. He had collected Adia's tears in small bottles, soaking his clothes, handkerchief, and even his Bible with the miraculous liquid. As he stepped onto the stage, the crowd erupted in cheers. One by one, he called the sick forward. A blind man regained his sight. A crippled woman walked for the first time in years. A child with a mysterious illness was healed instantly. The crowd roared with excitement, and the pastor's name spread across the country like wildfire. Soon, the small church grew into a massive congregation. his halls filled with thousands of worshippers every Sunday. The pastor became a celebrity, his face plastered on billboards and his sermons broadcast on television. He amassed wealth beyond imagination: luxury cars, multi-million-dollar properties, and even a private jet. But Adia's life was far from glamorous. While the pastor and his family reveled in their newfound wealth and fame, Adia was locked away in their mansion, hidden from the world. She was no longer a person but a tool, a source of miracles to be exploited. Her days were spent in isolation, her tears collected in bottles for the next crusade. She was forbidden from going to school, making friends, or even stepping outside. The vibrant, golden-haired girl who had once dreamed of a better life was now a shadow of herself, her spirit crushed under the weight of their greed. One day, as she sat alone in her room, Adia called her aunt, her voice trembling with desperation. "I want to go back to my mother," she pleaded. "I don't feel okay here. I cry every single day so you can drain me of my tears. I don't go to school. I don't have a life. I don't know anyone or anything. You don't even take me to church anymore." Her aunt tried to soothe her, promising that things would change soon. But Adia knew better. She had seen the truth in her dreams and visions, a truth that whispered of freedom and a life beyond the walls of her gilded cage. As Adia sat in her room, staring at the locked door, she made a decision. She would no longer be a prisoner. She would find a way to escape, to reclaim her life and her powers. Adia had spent months planning her escape. She had memorized the routines of the security guards, identified blind spots in the mansion's surveillance, and even stolen a key to the back gate. But her greatest challenge was overcoming her fear, the fear of what would happen if she failed. One night, as the pastor and his family boarded their private jet for yet another international crusade, Adia seized her chance. She waited until the mansion was quiet, then slipped out of her room, her heart pounding. She moved silently through the halls, her golden hair hidden under a dark scarf. As she reached the back gate, she heard footsteps behind her. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Adia," her voice whispered. It was Otita, the young security guard who had always been kind to her. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm coming with you," he said firmly. "I can't let you do this alone." Adia hesitated, then nodded. Together they slipped through the gate and disappeared into the night. Adia and Otita traveled for days, avoiding main roads and staying hidden. When they finally reached the village, Adia's mother, Mileti, wept with joy at the sight of her daughter. But her tears turned to anger as Adia recounted the horrors she had endured. Mileti took Adia to the village priest, a wise and revered elder who had long sensed the girl's extraordinary destiny. Under his guidance, Adia began to explore her powers, learning to harness them for healing and protection rather than exploitation and raining of her tears. Word of Adia's abilities spread like wildfire. People from far and wide came to the village, seeking her blessings and healing. By the stream where she once played as a child, Adia performed miracles, restoring sight to the blind, healing the sick, and bringing hope to the hopeless. The village, once struggling and forgotten, flourished under her care. Prosperity returned, and the people revered her as a priestess, a bridge between the mortal world and the divine. Meanwhile, the pastor's empire began to crumble. Without Adia's tears, his miracles ceased and his congregation dwindled. Desperate to maintain his power, he launched a nationwide search for Adia, offering a hefty reward for her capture. One day, as Adia sat by the stream, she felt a familiar presence. The spirit that had bound itself to her at birth appeared once more, his form radiant and serene. "I have fulfilled my course," he said, his voice echoing like 1,000 whispers. "The debt is paid. I am free, but I won't leave you. I'm no longer bound to you, but I'm with you as a friend and as a companion because of your good heart and wisdom." With those words, the spirit vanished, leaving Adia with a sense of peace and purpose. But Adia's peace was short-lived. The pastor, driven by desperation and greed, tracked her down to the village. He arrived with a team of armed men, demanding that Adia return with him. The villagers stood their ground, forming a protective circle around Adia. "She is not yours to take," the village priest declared, his voice firm. The pastor sneered. "She belongs to me. Her powers are mine to control." Adia stepped forward, her golden hair shimmering in the sunlight. "No," she said, her voice steady. "My powers are a gift, not a tool for your greed. I will never go back with you." The pastor's face twisted with rage. He lunged at Adia, but before he could reach her, the ground beneath him began to shake. The spirit reappeared, its form towering and menacing. "You have exploited the innocent for too long," the spirit boomed. "Your time is over." With a wave of its hand, the spirit banished the pastor and his men from the village, never to return. Adia's journey taught her the true meaning of power, not as a means of control but as a gift to be shared with others. She dedicated her life to healing and protecting her people, becoming a symbol of hope and resilience. The story of Adia and the pastor served as a cautionary tale, reminding everyone that true power comes from compassion, not exploitation.